We're pleased to welcome Charles Kirby, candidate for sheriff.
Okay, my name is Chuck Kirby. I'm a Republican running for Indian River County Sheriff. Background for me, I've got 30 years in law enforcement. I spent a little over 26 of those years with the Indian River County Sheriff's Office, retiring there as a captain. While at the Sheriff's Office, I worked in every division. I started in corrections. I've worked in patrol. I've worked in investigations. I was the liaison to Homeland Security as an intelligence officer. I ran the drug unit for the Sheriff's Office. And I've even done some of the outlying jobs as well as working at the Indian River County Courthouse. Sheriff's Office is a little bit different in police departments because we have some different areas. I found out before making captain, I was in charge of special operations. So our aviation unit, our guys on the water, our marine unit, K9, school resource, all those fell under my purview. So I used to tease people when I worked at the Sheriff's Office. I said, I'm Chuck Kirby, I'm a deputy sheriff currently holding the rank of captain. And that's kind of how it works a lot of times at Sheriff's Office. I mean, things are up and down as you go through there. And I'll be honest with you, I've worked with some deputies and some detectives and some correctional officers. I wouldn't trade for two captains, myself included. So there's a lot of good folks that work there. While at the Sheriff's Office, I remained, actually, what brought me to Florida, what brought me to Vero Beach was the United States Coast Guard. I came down here in 1987 on active duty. Spent a 4-year tour on active duty at Station Fort Pierce. And our area of operation ran all the way up into Indian River County. When I came off of active duty and I picked up the job at the Sheriff's Office, I stayed in the reserves. So I ended up retiring from the United States Coast Guard Reserves, having done a little over 10 years on active duty and 26 and a half years as a reserve. So I retired as a Chief Warrant Officer, actually right before I retired from the Sheriff's Office. So now I've been retired for about 2 years from both. The areas that affect the county may not directly affect the Sheriff's Office, although there's some impact to it. Obviously, the pandemic, COVID19, is the most serious issue that's affecting all of us. As I look at y'all with your mask on, I'm sitting here with mine off. I think that what it's done to the country, as far as, especially with the business community. I mean, we shut down businesses for the better part of 2 months on the backside of this. I mean, it had such a tremendous effect on both business owners as well as working class folks that work there. I mean, many of them have gone 2 months without a paycheck. Look at those things. I mean, the state of Florida's had some issues, obviously, getting up and running and catching up with the unemployment. So it's just been pretty traumatic. My fear is that nobody knows what's going to happen come fall or come winter. And I think that's the largest issue, because I don't think that the government's going to be as quick to shut down after we already put 40 million people out of work. So I think the important thing with that, getting back to the Sheriff's Office, is basically we kind of set the, we really need to set the example. The important thing is that we don't increase cases. I think right now there's an uptick in cases. I looked this morning and Florida has 66,000 cases across the state. There's 167 cases here in Indian River County, and we've unfortunately had 11 fatalities, many of which has been in our elder communities. I think that as we look at those numbers, I think that the fact that we're up to 167 may in part be because obviously we're doing more testing than we're ever doing before. So I think that probably the key indicators, and everybody's watched this, is going to be how many people end up in the hospital, and if we run out of hospital space, and obviously if we start seeing an uptick in fatalities. So I think as we get into the fall months, how that affects the Sheriff's Office, besides setting that standard, and you'll see a lot of the guys from the Sheriff's Office, when they respond, they're doing so with a mask on or with gloves on, and good for them. That's the right thing to do, because you never know, what scenario, and those folks are taking that back to their families. So and many of them have young families. We have a lot of young deputies at the Sheriff's Office. So in looking at that, I think the next sheriff, whoever that is, as for account, they have to look at it and see, how does this affect both internally and externally. Internally with the Sheriff's Office, we have some areas where it could devastate us. Although we have a lot of deputies, we could always reassign detectives and some of our special ops people and some of our other units that are outlying and bring those back into cover patrol. But we have areas such as public safety dispatch. Public safety dispatch, they're already on 12-hour shifts. There's always been kind of a shortfall of manpower there. So the problem being, if that was to get into our public safety dispatch and affect an entire shift, it would be pretty traumatic. I don't know how long we could work people 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the fatigue factors to go with those. So I think that planning for the Sheriff's Office for that, for the possibilities of how many people could be out of work, and really taking care of our public safety dispatchers, because they work in a closer and confined area that's really kind of difficult. There's not a whole lot you can do with it. So those are kind of how I see affecting the Sheriff's Office specifically, although it's a much larger issue across the nation, the state, and certainly our county and our cities here. The second issue right now is going to be the civil rights movement. As everybody can see, I mean, that's certainly in the forefront of everybody's mind with the stuff that's been going on. I think that the next sheriff, whoever's elected, they need to understand that serving as the next sheriff is just that, it's service. And we're answerable to everybody. Although I'm a Republican, once elected, I think it's important to realize that when you're sheriff for everybody. That includes Democrats, that includes Libertarians, that includes independents. So I think once you're in that role, you have to be willing to listen to everybody's point of view. I know that after the incident up in Minneapolis with George Floyd, the first protest that was here was actually held across the street from the sheriff's office. That was actually, the protest was organized by Mershon Green. I know Mershon, I've met with her on several occasions. And I think what's probably unique with her is there's a different viewpoint of the sheriff's office depending on where you live and where your background comes from. I know that Mershon's uncle, Byrus Green, actually lost his life in an interaction with the sheriff's office. I've also sat down and I've met with Yolanda Woods, her daughter, Alteria. I knew Alteria actually because she worked at the Publix right down the street from my house. So I knew her there. So I had kind of a personal contact with her. Although we weren't friends, we were friendly. And in talking to folks that have lost a loved one in interactions with the sheriff's office, they have a completely different viewpoint. And as you look across the country, I think the important thing is to be able to sit down with everybody. 2 days ago, I went down, I sat down, there's an event actually this Friday at 43rd Street next to Mosley's store. There's a little open lot there if you've never been to that part of Gifford. And a lot of people hang out there. There's some big oak trees. So I went down there, I just sat down. I pulled my truck up. I've got an old 53 Chevy pickup truck that's got my name on the side. And I put the tailgate down and I sat down. It was amazing to me how many people would stop and talk to me. As we sat there and we had those discussions, it's, their viewpoint, and I try to say that the viewpoint of the folks that live in Gifford or some of our other areas don't have the same viewpoint as the people that live on the beach, and don't really have the same interactions with the sheriff's office directly. So I think the important thing is that, as I said, that whoever the next sheriff when elected, you have to be able to talk and listen to everybody's point of view and put out positions. I don't think you can sit back and not say what you're going to do. I put out a position actually just this last week that said exactly that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to implement body cameras across the sheriff's office. That's to protect the deputies as much as it is for other folks. And I think the step beyond that is that we're going to implement a civilian review process for our disciplinary actions. I think that opens up an avenue that we can bring people from the outside, and then it's not, okay, the sheriff's office is investigating themselves. Many instances we can't turn every investigation over to an outside entity. If we have a use of deadly force case, absolutely, we're going to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. We're going to turn those investigations over. I don't think the right thing to do is to have it investigated from the sheriff's office. I really don't even think the right thing to do is to have the state attorneys investigate it, because our detectives and the state attorney investigators, they work hand in hand on many cases. It's a difficult position to put everybody in. So it's better to just avoid even the appearance of evil with an external. And I think the last piece of that is going to be, I know everybody's watched the headlines, and there's lots of things going on about public records. This is the people's business. So the other intent for me is that we're going to make everything available. Basically, we're going to release everything on public records request. Some things as far as disciplinary, we're going to put out, I think, on transparency and what goes on at the sheriff's office. But the point is even if it's not flattering or if it's uncomfortable, we're still going to put that information out on public information. So I think that's a way that we can bridge some of those gaps. There's a lot of calls right now to defund the police. There's calls to do away with certain protections that police have from civil liability. And I think maybe those steps are a little bit too far on doing those, but I think there's a lot of steps that we can take that's the interim that's also supporting our deputies as well as supporting the people in all of our communities. I think the last piece, and I know this because I was the planner for the sheriff's office actually under Ward Raymond. I had a unique opportunity when he took office. They moved me up into planning and research, and I got to draft a career service bill which protects all of our employees when a new sheriff comes in. So I actually had which is probably the highlight of my career, I had the opportunity to draft that, certainly at the direction of Sheriff Raymond. And we put that up and it was passed into a law. So basically from the records clerk all the way up to the undersheriff, when a new sheriff comes in, their job is protected. Although there's some movement, nobody's going to lose their jobs. And I've worked before we had those abilities. And there's been some bloodlettings in the past in a lot of sheriff's office when a new sheriff comes in. I think the last piece is growth in the community. My gut tells me, and I'm certainly no expert, but in talking to my friends that are realtors and some of the other businesses, and you look at the growth, where my house is, I've got a brand new house being built left of me, a brand new house being built right of me, and they just set the foundation for the one across the street. We still have a pretty significant amount of growth going on in Indian River County. I think with the COVID-19, if that makes a recurrence again this fall and this winter, you're going to see a lot of people trying to come out of urban areas. And right now, in my neighborhood, I live in a GHO community, good company. We moved in there. We were actually the fourth house, so I've watched every house being built since. And what's happened is I've got neighbors from both. We've got a few folks that are local business owners, myself being in law enforcement, and then the other mixture is kind of a little bit of both. We've got people coming out of New England, New York, New Jersey, and those areas, and we have just as many people coming up from Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm. So I think that people are looking for smaller communities, and I think that if COVID-19 makes a recurrence with a pandemic, I think we're going to see larger amounts of growth, so you're going to see more tracks. And I think the things that's happened even over the last couple of years in Sebastian with the annexation, I know that was a very large issue politically up there for adding houses. I know before that, when Fellsmere annexed all that property coming out all the way down almost to State Road 60, a lot of that kind of takes the teeth out of the urban service boundary. So what happens with that is if they develop, if developers come in and say, yeah, this is a good move for us, we're going to develop, and they bring in the roads and the surface, then it's going to bring a lot more people. Although that's good for business, there's a lot of things that come with growth that don't pay for themselves. Travel on our roadways. Do we have enough schools to put those folks in? Specifically for the sheriff's office, when you add that many more people on the roadways, we have more accidents and more fatalities. We have more crime. If we add more businesses out there, then it's one of those things that we have to look at from the sheriff's office. Does it require, and it's not just adding more deputies. Every time you have a deputy, then you also have across our sheriff's office, you have to look at it from a bigger viewpoint. If we add one position at the sheriff's office, it takes almost 7 people to cover that position 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So one new position creates 7 job openings. And then additional openings as you look at personnel that it takes to, because right now, being a law enforcement officer obviously isn't maybe what it was 20 years ago. And there's a difficulty across all law enforcement agencies in recruiting and retention of personnel. The sheriff's office, we've lost personnel from the sheriff's office, specifically over the last several years to each one of the municipalities, even in our own county. And then we're losing people to St. Lucie County, Martin County, because it's a commutable distance. And those agencies actually pay a little better than Indian River. And not just on the starting pay, their top out pay is significantly better than Indian River. So those are things that we have to look at. We have to work with business owners, with the other government, say, how can we at least be competitive in this? And then our recruiting and try to bring that. So all of that stuff brings issues that run back on the sheriff's office as well as the community, as well as the business community. So I think the growth issue is going to, I know before the bust in 2008, the amount of growth here, we ended up building a jail facility at the sheriff's office because the growth was growing so fast. We didn't know that we were going to be able to handle those things. And when they built that jail, then obviously the bottom fell out of the market and those things that didn't happen. But as we look at that, we have to be ahead of it. So all the things at the sheriff's office that we have to add and all the support roles in addition, it's things that we have to look forward to, and realizing that, under COVID, if we have more businesses shut down, then there's less revenue coming in, and then what happens to the budget? So how do you balance all those pieces? So I think experience tells me that we have to look at those things and we have to kind of make ourselves resilient in the event that those things occur and have a plan for it. So that would be probably the 3 things that I think are probably the most specifically important to the sheriff's office. If I could, kind of touching back to the civil rights issue, especially yesterday after the incident that occurred at Walmart, where we had an active shooter scenario. I'm sure everybody's had an opportunity to look at that. It was a shoplifting, came out initially as a shoplifting. 2 deputies responded. I've been that deputy before. I've responded to, just dozens and dozens of shoplifting calls. It's not one of those calls that heightens your alert or your awareness. So as these guys are walking up to make what they think is going to be a shoplifting arrest, all of a sudden the guy pulls out a firearm and starts shooting at him. That's an awkward position to be in. Thank God they didn't hit either one of the deputies. I think that he tried to, at least from my understanding from the news reports, that he tried to carjack the first car. They wouldn't let him in. They were trying to get away, and he ended up shooting into the vehicle and hitting 2 of the occupants in the vehicle. He was then able to turn around and carjack another vehicle and take off from the vehicle. Another one of the sheriff's deputies gave pursuit down through that area, and he got out of the car at some point down at the other end. He started firing at the deputy, and the deputy returned fire through the windshield, something that we've trained our deputies to do from a long time back. It's kind of an awkward scenario, but as some of the things have been happening across the country with law enforcement officers. You got to realize that, when somebody's shooting at you, you don't have time. It's very hard to unholster a weapon in a sitting position, and it's coming out. We've taught our guys basically that you can fire through the windshield. It doesn't deflect the wounds, or it doesn't deflect the bullets and send them off into crazy directions. And fortunately, I think that deputy, and they really haven't identified who it is certainly a hero. And he came out on top of that fight at the end of the day. So, but in looking at that, I think people from all our communities have to realize that, once we have those type of incidents in our county, the heightened awareness comes up, that level of complacency goes away. So as we're making traffic stops or responding to those kind of calls, you may see our deputies being a little more cautious or a little more assertive. And I don't think that would be any different if you looked at it, if you stood in their shoes and looked at it, much like folks in some of our poorer communities look at it as we make the stops for them. So I think we just have to be able to kind of stand in each other's shoes and look at it from a point, and hopefully be able to open up a dialogue and and continue that conversation so that so things actually get better. There's right now there's 5 candidates for sheriff. There's a difference in all of us, and I think I know all the Republican candidates. I don't know Ms. Cooney personally or her background, but I know the other 4, and everybody that's in this race is qualified to be sheriff. And let me state that outright. We have different experiences, different backgrounds. Obviously, mine comes from military and the sheriff's office. 2 of us have extensive experience at the sheriff's office. The other 2 have from other agencies outside. So I think that the significant difference for me is that piece of experience. As I said, I've worked in every division and coming across those things. So if that experience piece, I would hope, would make a difference as you look at that. I'm not saying that I have a lot more years than Eric. Although I was there 26 years, you have to remember that 6 of those years I spent deployed in the military, because I went back on active duty, 6 deployments for 6 years in the decade following 9/11. So that 26 years comes down to 20. And I think Eric has somewhere close to that. He's just under. So our differences probably run in assignments and what we've done in the past. I've actually had every assignment at the sheriff's office as lieutenant before promoting to captain, with the exception of 1, which is public information officer. And I will not try to compete with Eric on public information, because I think he does a phenomenal job. So I'll close with that.